First Samuel chapter 16. First Samuel chapter 16. I'm going to talk about something that's probably near and dear to most everyone's heart here, running, right? Yeah. Something that most of us, we do it because it's needed, it's not exactly a love. But we're going to talk about specifically what's your form of running. So let's start in verse 4. First Samuel chapter, I think I said 16, it's 17. Chapter 17, verse 4. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath at Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. And the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass, and he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If ye be able to fight with me, and to kill me, then I will be your servants. But if I prevail against him, and kill him, then shall ye be our servants, and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man, that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Let's pray. Dear Father, Lord, thank you for this evening. Lord, thank you for those who, Lord, came out to hear your word. Lord, I pray that you would, Lord, take the words out of my mouth and put the words in that you would want. I pray you would give me the wisdom, Lord, and I pray that you would help the message to be milk and meat for this evening. In Jesus' name we pray. So here we have the Philistines who had come to conquer God's people. But in the way of this battle stood a formidable obstacle, Goliath of Gath, whom we all know. In verse 16, it says that, And the Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days. So this had been going on with Goliath coming out day by day for 40 days. And it sounds like in the other verses that the fear kept growing. So just as a side note, those of us who allow fear into our lives, for God has not given us the spirit of fear, so we know it's not from God, but if we allow it to stay, it is like a magnifying glass. I'm sure the army of Israel kept viewing Goliath as a bigger and bigger giant as those 40 days progressed. So do not allow fear to stay in our life. Let's look at verse 32, and we will see the hero of this story. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. So we see that word fail, something that is to become deficient, to become insufficient. So what did they become deficient of? If you hold your place there and turn to Deuteronomy. In verse 20, chapter 20, verse 1. Says, When thou goest out to battle against thine enemies, and seest horses and chariots and a people more than thou, be not afraid of them, for the Lord thy God is with thee, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And it shall be, when ye are come nigh unto the battle, that the priest shall approach and speak unto the people, and shall say unto them, Hear, O Israel, ye approach this day unto battle against your enemies. Let not your hearts faint. Fear not, and do not tremble, neither be ye terrified because of them. For the Lord your God is he that goeth with you to fight for you against your enemies, to save you. Now, something interesting that happened 2 chapters before this, in 1 Samuel 15:35, it says, And Samuel came no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Now we know that Samuel was the prophet of Israel at that time, and we just read how the prophet was supposed to come and speak to the army before the battle, and it did not happen. So the thing that David's heart was talking about, the heart failing, what a heart had become deficient in was faith. And the men of Israel had faith lacking that day. Proverbs 3:5, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not to thy own understanding. So the first thing we're going to look at is how David ran, or maybe more importantly, the direction in which he ran. In verse 48 of Samuel, 1 Samuel, back in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 48 says, and it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hastened and ran towards the army to meet the Philistine. So David didn't just go out to fight Goliath, but he ran towards him and also towards the Philistines. These were two huge obstacles in the direction of David's run, as well as two huge fear factors. We have Goliath, whose obvious fear factor was his 6 cubits in a span, around 9 foot 3 inches. His coat of mail, which in and of itself was 125 pounds. So this wasn't just a big, defenseless blob. And then he also had his staff, a weaver's beam, was like a weaver's beam, and the head weighed 600 shekels of iron, around 16 pounds, and the beam was estimated around 12 feet long. So I challenge anybody to put a 15-pound dumbbell on the end of a 12-foot stick and see how well you can wield that. So we have a giant who was well-armored, and not only was he a giant, but he was also a strong giant at that. And then we have the next fear factor. He also ran towards the Philistines, the army. And if he was able to beat Goliath, I'm sure in his mind was, well, now there's the rest of the army to deal with as well. We know he left his army, and it sounds like he went down into a valley to meet Goliath, and he was running towards Goliath. So who knows, he could have been closer to the Philistines' army than to even his own. And you might say, but Brother Luke, remember, if David was to win, then the Philistines would be the servants. He wouldn't have to worry about it. Well, we saw that whenever he did win, they ran. So I don't think they were going to honor their commitment. And then the third fear factor was the fight with Goliath itself and the outcomes of that battle. If he was to lose that battle, we already know that the state of Israel is in a very bad spot. So if he was to lose, just imagine how that would affect the rest of Israel. And if for some instance Israel would have honored the commitment, we already know the Philistines wouldn't have, then the rest of Israel would have went into slavery because of it. Doesn't get much worse, more worse than that. Possibly death, and then the rest of your nation in slavery or being killed or retreating, leaving their towns and villages. So after all that we just looked at, how was David able to run at Goliath when the whole nation of Israel was in essence running away from him? To get this answer, let's look at why he was running. Let's read verse 10 of the same chapter. It says, and the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. David heard this challenge from Goliath. Now let's read verse 26. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, what shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? So David heard the challenge, and he realized something needed to be done about it. Goliath was causing the hearts of the Israelites to fail, and he was defying David's God. And we're looking at verse 29. It says, and David said, what have I now done? Is there not a cause? So we see the ultimate reason that David was running was because he had a cause to do so. David was looking around. We see him trying to instill in the hearts and minds of men of Israel the cause. He was trying to present to them what they would get if they were able to defeat him? What were the rewards? And the cause was not springing up in any other of the men of Israel's hearts that he was talking to. Now, one of my favorite quotes by Edmund Burke is, all that it takes for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. Now, as much as we talk about the men of Israel and how they were fearful, I'm sure they weren't all dead, beat dads or men that didn't have any courage, any backbone. Whenever we talk about David as king, one of the things we talk about is David's mighty men. Who knows? Some of those mighty men could have been in Israel's army at that point in time. We know, obviously, David was alive at that point in time, so why not some of those mighty men could have been alive at that exact same time, and all the things that those mighty men were able to do later on in life. So there was something that David had at that point in time that those men didn't, and that was that cause. Now, runners normally all have a cause, all have a reason for running, as I stated before. Maybe it's health, maybe it's fear. They all have some sort of cause. A runner without a cause is destined to failure. He will have no motivation, he'll get bored, he won't push himself, and eventually he will quit. Now, there's two things that can affect someone that is running in a negative way. Number one, do you have a cause? And to be able to have a cause in the Christian race, in the Christian life, is salvation. If you are not saved, then you are running without a cause. You are running for your own personal wealth and gain, and at the end, it is nothing but death and hell and damnation forever. The number two negative reason is a forgotten cause. The race of a Christian and a biblical Bible running is something that we all should have as a Christian. And I think whenever we lose it, whenever we start slowing down, is because we forget why we started. We forget the love of God. We love him because he first loved us. We forget the love he had for us. We forget how he gave himself for us, and we start slowing down in our running. Just imagine watching a race, watching someone maybe an Olympic run race, and the person you are rooting for steps out of the designated racing trail or road or path and gets in and mixes with the spectators. Maybe he takes a hoodie and throws it on. Maybe he's just trying to blend in and appear that he's not even one that is running. That is, I believe, how we appear to God whenever we are supposed to be running the Christian race, and all of a sudden we choose to stop. We choose to take a rest. We choose to sit on the sidelines. In the Christian life, Paul spoke about those who run must run all. If we are not moving forward in the Christian life, then we are moving backward. So do we have that cause? So now we know why David was running. So let's look at how he was able to run with those fear factors in the way. Goliath, the Philistines' army, and the outcome of the battle with Goliath. So if we zoom in and look specifically at David's form of running, his manner or pattern, then we can see some things specifically. If anybody's ever run, they know that good form can make you run longer, it can make you run faster, and it can prevent injuries in a drastic way. And David, we see, had some very, very good running form. Number one, he ran with courage. And as we all know, courage is not the absence of fear. Goliath was there, all the fears we already talked about, but it's doing what is right in the presence of it. So let's read verse 24. It says, "And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid." One thing about fear is it alters the direction of your run. The men of Israel were running too, as we read. They were running, though, in the wrong direction. David was running with courage, even though he knew the dangers that were lying ahead. A runner who has the spirit of fear has no clue where he is going. When warning signs start to pop up, he just takes the path that is of the least resistance. Some tonight, possibly, who are here, God forbid, that you are still unsaved after listening to all the preaching of our pastor. If you are in that position, then you are running in possibly everywhere and nowhere. You're going no direction at all, and you need to get on the path of life. Do you have a direction in the race that you are running? We see the men of Israel, whenever Goliath came out and was doing his challenging day-to-day, we see that the men of Israel fled. Now, I'm sure if we could go back in time and watch from a drone cam the men of Israel flee, I bet you they all didn't run in the same spot. I bet you some ran over here, some ran over there, some maybe dove down over here, and they were all just trying to get away of the fear factor. Not only does fear not give you a direction to run, it doesn't even point you always in the same direction. So you have no clue where you are running at any given point in time. You might be running back from the way that you came. Another thing about David's running is he ran consistently. Let's read verse 42. It says, "And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy and of a fair countenance." When there was a reason that David was running when no one else would. We see that even King Saul himself, who was head and shoulders above everyone else, would not go to fight Goliath. But a ruddy youth, as we just read, was able to do so. In verse 22, it says, "And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage and ran into the army and came and saluted his brethren." The reason that David was able to run consistently was because whenever he ran towards Goliath, it wasn't his first time running. He had been doing it previously throughout his life. His father had told him to take food to his brothers and see how they were doing. It was a simple, easy task, yet he consistently ran towards every cause that God had given him, whether it was from God himself, whether it was from his father, or whether it was probably of anybody in authority in his life. Let's read verse 34 through 37. "And David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing they have defied the armies of the living God. David said, Moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee." David was able to run consistently because he also ran previously whenever fears, and people would argue, just as great as Goliath, yet no one knew about it. He still ran consistently in those times as well. We can't just run whenever people are able to see us, whenever there's a crowd, whenever there's something to be gained from it. The loss between David and fighting the lion and the bear was but just a sheep, and possibly even the loss of his own life, yet he still ran consistently in obscurity. One thing I've learned about running is the only way to get better is if you do it consistently. You can try all kinds of hacks. You can try $19.99 fixes online, but the only way to get better is just to do it. And David was able to do that consistently early on in life, and that was able to lead him up to Goliath and do it as if it was clockwork. If we are, as Christians, not faithfully running the race, then how do we expect to get through and over the mountains of life whenever things pop up? How do we expect God to give us a number and put us in one of his marathons if we're not training for it? Just as someone who is running the race, who is wanting to do some type of marathon, a triathlon, practices for it to get into it. Some races you have to have a good enough time just to qualify to get into it. How do we expect God to use us if we as Christians aren't training on a daily basis for God to say, yes, I want to use you? There was a reason that he chose Job. It was not just because he was, it sounds like one of the wealthiest men at that time. It wasn't because he had a big family. It's because that he was training spiritually. And God said, this is my best warrior. This is my best runner at this point in time.
Yeah.
And lastly, David's form stayed the same until he completed his run. Let's pick up at verse 48. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hastened and ran towards the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. And David won, right? The victory was over. It was completed. And let's read verse 50. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. In between verse 49 and verse 50 is a problem that we as Christians find ourselves in, I think, all too often. The victory is all but won. The giant is down and out, yet we don't draw the sword and slay the giant. You cannot win a race by running 3/4 of it and stopping right there. You could have blown everyone out. You could be ahead by half of the race at 3/4 the way, and yet if you stop, it is all but for nothing. There are some of us who may start out strong, we may be excited. Maybe it started at salvation, and the burden God had lifted off of us, and just we were ready to do anything and everything for God, and we straight out of the gate grabbed our number and took off running. Yet, as things came into our life, and as maybe little giants came in, then we started slowing down. Maybe we're at this point in life right now. There is a giant that we've been able to knock down. Maybe it's a sin of commission. Maybe it's a sin of omission. Maybe it's something that we were wanting to do for the Lord for a long time. And maybe it was consistently memorizing a verse every week. Or maybe it was going out soul winning a certain amount of time. And we were able to now, finally, we've been doing it consistently. The giant of getting time in and telling the flesh, no, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And yet we need to go ahead and draw the sword and cut the head off. Imagine if David stopped right there, right? He knocked the giant out with the stone, and then he starts celebrating. You know, he turns around and starts, as they do in this day and age, doing his little jig and letting everyone know that he had just knocked down the giant. And by the time he turns around, Goliath is now up and is now drawing the sword instead of David, and is going to knock David out. Are there things in our life where the Lord has given us the victory, we've asked for it, now we need to go ahead and slay the giant? Maybe it's a certain sin. I know there's certain sins that are besetting sins that we like the flavor of. We don't want it to have control. We don't want to get convicted whenever the preacher preaches, yet we still like the flavor of it. So we knock it out and we put a leash on it, and we think we've got it tamed. Yet one day you'll wake up and the leash is on your neck and the sin is back in control. What is there in our lives where we need to go ahead and slay that giant? We see that David was able to run consistently all the way through, all the way to the killing of the giant. He did not slow down. So in our lives, we need to run with a cause. We need to run consistently. We need to run with courage. And we cannot allow that giant to get back up. David, we see at the end, got rewards. David got a trophy. We see that he held the head up of the giant, finally slain. And the army of Israel won the battle. And David, ultimately, his goal, his cause was he pleased his God in doing it. I'm sure every gold medalist will tell you that it was hard. It was not easy. They suffered, they sweat, they bled, they had sleepless nights, but they did what they had to do to, at the end of the day, have that gold medal draped around our neck. We as Christians that have a true cause, not just some glory, not just something that's tangible that can hang around our neck, but have a real cause, are we going to do less than an Olympian on this earth whenever God says, what stopped you, what hindered you at that 3/4 mark, what did you pull yourself out of the race for? So what is your form of running right now? What do you need to do to get better and stay consistent?
Good. There's a couple things I was thinking of.